Okay, so recording on, and we do have this proposal from Cambridge Industries, but it's pretty narrowly focused on Volta. And I mean, kind of fell through the cracks a little bit.
Larry?
Yeah. Is there a question?
If you're sharing, we don't see it.
I wasn't sure. You have it in your email, but I can, just a second, let me put it up on the screen.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Can you see it?
Thanks. Yep, we can.
So it's pretty narrowly focused on Volta. Although from an O&F collaborator point of view, officially, we would be the ones to approve it, except I don't know that we are able to do that without more input from Volta. We got some feedback on the email list from David. And I don't remember the specifics, but I think he thought it was okay, but he was asking some questions. I haven't heard from Saurav. Jono, do you know anything about this?
Not really. I was just reading through the proposal. I think it looks pretty much okay to me. If it's mainly limited to them contributing an adapter for RLT, then there wouldn't be any problem.
Yeah. So what if we took the action that, assuming we got positive response from the principals on Volta, that from the Cord Tst point of view, this is perfectly fine. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes.
All right, so I will go attempt to get that feedback. All right. Other than that, I wanted to revisit a question that Jono raised, and I've got nothing else to show. The question that Jono raised about ONOS, and we're going to pull on a thread, and it's going to unravel into a giant discussion about message buses. But let's go ahead and start with the narrow question that Jono raised.
Yeah, I guess the narrow problem that I'm focused on right now is that we need to deliver events that are coming up to the orchestration system, XOS, from the data. And so we need some kind of mechanism to do that. And I remember we talked about this a couple of months ago on a platform call. And there was one proposal which was to use a message bus where ONOS just shoves the events on the message bus, and then XOS would listen. Okay, so this is a very narrow control notification, an event that will trigger some kind of control action. This is not delivering arbitrary monitoring data. I mean, obviously one can monitor for this event, but that's not the intent here. Yeah, but there are events that are coming from the data plan that need to be sent up to higher level systems.
I'm sorry, Jono, after the first word,
Right.
Could you restate that? I don't know if anyone else had problems, but I couldn't hear it. Now you're freezing again.
Do you want to go closer to the?
Where's the mic?
Is it connected?
Yeah. They're sounding fine to Scott, so maybe it's the connection going to Arizona that's having it.
Yeah, just a second. Let me try to shut down some video. Well, go ahead and try again. It probably is local to me.
Yeah, I was just saying right now we have a narrow problem, but I think pretty soon with FCAPS requirements coming in, we're going to see a lot more need for sending to the higher level systems.
Okay, that was the thread that I was expecting. That was what I was expecting to unravel.
Yeah, I know on the Volta. I know on the Volta side, we've just received like some feedback gaps, some counters and requirements that are going to need to come up from the data plane up to ONOS and other systems.
So as soon as we start talking about delivering monitoring data of this sort, we're going to get into a question of how to structure it so everyone knows how to interpret all the bits on the message bus. Well, I think we can probably agree for the narrow point, which we do have to get resolved soon probably, that having the message bus as a way of triggering control action is perfectly fine. If anyone wants to offer alternatives, that's okay, but that one I don't think isn't such a big question.
Yeah, I think that seems to be the preferred approach.
Okay, so
rather than doing specific integrations into ONOS or other systems, at least with the message bus, you have a kind of decoupling into systems.
We can implement for a narrow use case, but we design for the larger, yet designed for not completely unknown use case, set of use cases. Once we start using something like message bus, the number of users of it will become more apparent. So we should implementation design this with an open mind of being used not just for this narrow FCAPS kind of use case, but also for other sorts of applications. Because 2 months ago when we talked in the platform call, it was for a few other things, like how XOS communicates its intent to Kubernetes and back and forth and stuff like that. So there were a few parallel use cases that to just focus on an implementation design for this narrow use case.
all right, so
It's perfectly fine.
In XOS, we already have a message bus. Do we intend to unify it with this Kafka bus?
well, we certainly so one of the just a second. Can you find the phone number to call?
What the Larry, if you're saying something, we are not able to hear it.
Yeah, and our audio was breaking up terribly, so I'm going to try to call in on my cell phone and turn this audio off. Just a second. I'm going to need a number of some kind, right? 971. Okay, prepare for.
Please enter your audio PIN followed by the pound or hash sign. If you do not have a PIN, just press pound or hash.
Okay, let's try again. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So using the message bus as a control signal that's fine, and we could consolidate its use to do that for with Red is great. The Redis message bus with Kafka, although we don't have to make that urgent. Eventually, we certainly should consolidate. But I think we decided when we were having that discussion earlier that we would not use the message bus for heavy amounts of data. These were basically signals that told you to go make a call somewhere, and you would use the REST API or other means to get data out of whoever had just notified you. So on the narrow case with ONOS, Jonah, would that work, or do we need to pass the quote-unquote data along with those events?
I mean, you could implement it as a signal and then a secondary REST call to retrieve the data, but yeah, it seems like it's, I don't know. The model that I'm kind of thinking is that Onos sees some event on the bus and then kind of forgets about it, right? It's not really waiting for a response or caring what happens to it. It's just signaling that something happened or sending the data that something happened. And then it's up to the higher level systems to deal with that reaction when they want.
So can you give someone else that can maybe speak to this when we had this discussion before better than my memory, but do you have examples? Can you cite some examples of when this would be called, when this would happen, what the event?
Yeah, the immediate need we have is that when an ONU gets detected on the data plane, Volta and Onos will start to bring it up, but then they need to send an event that the ONU with a particular serial number was detected, and then XOS will go, potentially depending on the deployment, it will validate whether that serial number is valid, and if it's not, it will need to make a call back to Onos telling it to disable this ONU.
Okay, so that's a great example. That's an event with a very, very minor bit of data that goes, maybe a serial number. I'm looking for some way of avoiding this turning into a performance monitoring channel, which I think is going to be problematic. And my crude line is confirmation versus monitoring data, and obviously there's overlap. You're monitoring ONUs coming up, but that's triggering a control. That's one-to-one triggering a control event.
So if it is not going to have data, Kafka is probably going to be an overkill. I think Redis or Zookeeper themselves have emerging pub/sub models. I think Kyo just mentioned that in the email. We should probably use a lightweight pub/sub architecture like Redis in that case if you're not going to push and translate a lot of data.
Okay, so
there is one issue with Redis is that it is not persisting events. I mean, if the Onos send an event to a Redis pub/sub queue and XOS is not listening for any reason in that moment, the event will get lost. So maybe something that offers persistence will be more reliable if we are sending control events on that.
Could it also maybe periodically poll and say, do you have anything that's outstanding that I missed? Or is that not a good idea?
Right. So the second the events are non-reliable, you have to pull back to that or retry it, I guess. So we're not going to solve necessarily all the technical issues here. This is probably going to pick it up again with a platform discussion. But so that's one issue. The other issue is what do we do about getting out the full range of FCAPS data, which is, again, one option is to use this message bus. And I wanted just to throw out a couple of things on that discussion. One is we're going to probably need to agree to some conventions and structure. And two, related to that, to note that for syslog, we already are doing that with multi-struct log. And it would be good if we can figure out a way to be consistent with that in approach, if not details. And I guess that leads to kind of the other thing, which is the assumption who's listening on these buses, because if we get into any kind of multi-tenant situation, I mean, it's one thing for a management plane like XOS to be watching, but it might be another if arbitrary data is going. At some point, multi-tenancy is going to be an issue, and just to keep that in mind. I think back to the struct log notion, I think it is also going to be important to annotate the data. It's not just that we have conventions, but that we have enough resolution to the data that we're posting, that we can figure out where it came from, and therefore who should see it and what to do with it, and who should be interested in it.
If you're using something like Kafka, there are patterns that let you do that. You can actually channels for the raw data that come in, and you can only hook up, create certain types of consumers for certain kinds of translated data.
So, all right. So one thing that we can certainly do if we start to set up address that original issue and set up a controlled notification channel that is, for example, one that XOS might be watching. Maybe there's others that need to watch in this path as well.
Yeah.
Jonah, for the example, the direct Volta example, is there a performance requirement to that? Are people expecting that you turn on your own U and there's some round trip time? Do we have a performance goal with regards to that?
I don't think in this specific case, no. But as just as an aside, as some of the Volta team did some performance comparisons of inter-component messaging using Kafka versus direct gRPC messages, and they found them to be relatively comparable in terms of latency.
So Larry, you mentioned a moment ago making this an XOS channel. I'm wondering if it's really a channel to the OLT synchronizer rather than a channel to, for example, the XOS core.
The question of how in XOS do we actually pick up events and how does that work in XOS, right? Because it seems the XOS model is generally sort of tough rather than sort of expecting to be receiving events from places up, down, right?
Yeah, I think we can do bottom up. So Mateo implemented pull steps, which did polling. We could implement, an event monitoring step. I mean, maybe step is not the right word since it's something that would be continuously running, but some event flow into a synchronizer that causes the synchronizer to make calls into XOS.
So Scott, so one question: is there one upward bound XOS event channel, or is there one per service per synchronizer? I don't know what the answer to that is.
Well, generally we try to put like the code complexity in the synchronizers rather than injecting service code into the core, when we can do it. So it seems that if any decoding these messages, understanding these events, what they mean, and what we have to do with them, then that's something that belongs in a service synchronizer rather than loading the core down with all that intelligence.
Well, okay, but you're going to get every synchronizer. All right. So translate that. Is that one channel per service or one channel for synchronizer?
I think that the channels would be more related to the type of data rather than the service that's consuming them, right? Because if you have say an OLT synchronizer channel, then ONOS needs to know that it has to write to the OLT synchronizer channel, right? It has to know details about how XOS is going to pick it up.
So the nuance is per data, but transform data, because the raw data can have transformers in Kafka that can transform it in a certain way and push them to different channels. Right. So it's not just raw channel; it's digested data.
Okay.
So going back to Scott's point, it's possible that some of the synchronizer function can actually be delegated to the translators.
Yeah.
So I'm a little reluctant to move the functionalities in many pieces. I would prefer to keep them aggregated in a single place just for the sake of simplicity. But I agree with Scott that maybe it's not one channel per synchronizer, but one channel per kind of data or kind of messages we are receiving, and then many synchronizer can subscribe to the same channel. And we may need a channel that is private for the core to send events that we are now sending through Redis.
Sure, that makes sense. The Jono's point, though, is that it's the source of the data that decides what channel to put it on. And if ONOS wants to publish data, then ONOS is going to be put on ONOS ONU channel. And synchronizers will know whether they need to care about that or not. So I guess that still puts the smarts in the synchronizers to which channels it wants to watch, which I think is consistent with what I said.
Are we then saying that ONOS would only publish one type of data, or is this really an ONOS channel? Because you could imagine, because it has multiple services running within it, multiple.
Well, this might be the Volt channel.
Okay.
For example.
So then it's the responsibility of ONOS to multiple Volt messages on the Volt channel, and assuming some other service was running, like VPN.
Well, it's technically the app, I think, that's putting the messages on the channel.
Yeah,
so give me aware.
I guess that maybe I'm not understanding what the parameters are of something like ONOS would have here, or whether it's capable of doing that.
Jono, it would be the Volt app that would be doing this, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
so you just put it in the app.
You already have the app context. So, all right. So this is a general structure that makes sense. We can flesh out the details on it. What I would like. So look, there's some parallel activity that I just want to bring to everyone's attention. Maybe you already know about it. For this semi-narrow case, I think we could work details and proceed just fine. And then we can also bundle in with that, wean ourselves off of Redis as well at some point. The other thing that's going to happen is the FCAPS thing, and I think the Cord team, which we need to hear from, couldn't make it today, will be putting some resources into this. Zach has been attending those meetings and been tracking the collector idea. Scott's watched it a little bit. We need to sort of sync all of these straw man first draft of this, and then everyone can speak as to details that they know. As it's run through, we do have not terribly big step as a very first example of a C is configuration. We already have storage. We have a way of doing that. We just need to flesh it out. A is accounting, which to a first approximation is reporting on objects already have and that could be extractable from our database. Data, those overload Kafka, and maybe it's the right thing to do, but I'm a little concerned about that. And it's also the case that we're going to have lots of different sources and subsystems. I don't know that all of that gets delivered to a message bus. Reason of some counter is or whatever. But that kind of says what the latest as model ONOS as a collector, and then have the notion of a collector is it gives you an endpoint for talking to one Elk Stack could be collecting, Salameter could be collecting, S-Flow taking.
I mean, it's not really designed to be a collector, I guess, really. It's collecting.
Access to.
But I guess I see Onos as a producer of data.
Someone may want.
And then there is data from these other sources you mentioned, right? So
a collector, the collector is simply a wrapper around a component that's inside of Cord that you can get used to, let's say, performance data out of.
Of that data
To export a quote-unquote collector interface to the extent, and the point is that we're going to try to define that interface. It's like, so, and so it is collecting data. To have the ability, anything that's collected useful data that you want to have access to some northbound analytics or dashboard or whatever could access that. Already exists be empty until they go out and do some work and do some collecting. Some things will already have collected, and we just want to export that.
So if you're suggesting, maybe I'm misunderstanding. You're suggesting that
that for its own control purposes have collected data. This is a way of exporting that to anyone that cares.
Do you see this as a
bunch of things?
Data for, you know, like reports stats. It then again publishes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we're going to have to. Various collectors could support both a push and a pull method. Some may support only one.
Onos gets.
Is the goal to describe the API, these underlying connectors, or is it just to register them as being the XOS side of it is just very important?
Well, it's minimally registration. But what is it? Register a. I don't know what it would be, and it would be good event or record type. And we wouldn't want to dictate, but if we could, but we would like over time that there's a convergence on that. So VES as an example, and some kind of endpoint. So it is some version of an API.
Yeah, and I'm trying to understand if these collectors, if part of that interface is expecting them to keep historical data. I don't know if Onos actually keeps port stats from time 0 till time n, or if it just keeps the last 2 iterations of port stats or what. But
so yeah, and my view of the failing of Cord the first time around is that we tried to be too prescriptive. And so I'd like to start with something minimal, which is approximately a registration, a collector register, and some simple specification of what you can expect from that collector, but not expected, for example, to have its own database. And then you can layer a collector on top of it that's even more powerful, but it's able to do time series and whatever. You can stack collectors.
I would agree. I guess I don't. I see still, even at that aspect, I see Onos as a data source, not as a data sink in some sense. And it's just, it's got data, it's publishing it, and then there's that the analytics is the thing that says, here's how I import data from different sources, some push, some pull. I can then timestamp and deal with historical data. I can deal with large data storage, characterization, roll up, all that type of stuff. I kind of see that as whatever you would call that Cord, but it's an analytics tool.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But even Uno is collecting data from. It's not the ultimate source of that data. It's collecting it from the switches. So the whole point here is there are some things that do other purposes that we can treat as collectors, and that word now is maybe a little bit loaded. And And some of them are primitive, and some of them are more powerful, and include databases and reformatting, and they might even interject. They may even do a tiny bit of an analytics and throw new events on the into the stream as well. So we've got we got control streams, we've got data streams, and we've got monitoring of data streams, or monitoring of other streams, which we'll call. And you're free to go build a super Uber collector, and it can go pull other data sources, including raw devices and other collectors, and do all kinds of aggregation and whatnot to it and ship it north. The problem is I just don't want to wait for that before we start exporting some of these other things as sources of data.
Yeah, I guess my natural inclination is at this point is, one, trying to understand what we're trying to perform analytics on and that type of, what problem we're trying to solve. And then, are there solutions out there that already do kind of this analytics? Tools like, what is it, there's a OpenNMS, those type of solutions. There's other ones obviously as well that these already open source analytics platforms.
Yeah, and we're gonna stay away from analytics. I think those are the ultimate consumers. I wouldn't necessarily call those collectors, although I guess you could, because they're doing analysis on the data. Although I guess they also collect data.
So what is the goal here that we're doing then? If analytics are being performed by someone else, what is it we're looking to accomplish?
What we're trying to accomplish is to provide a framework for registering the available collectors, and in stage 0 or stage 1, we will turn entities that we already have useful data into these collectors, register them, and we'll export them northbound. The expectation
okay, but again, going back to OpenNMS, and there's another one I forget that starts with a G. I can't remember the other open source management system like that. They already have Nagios. Thank you. That's the one I was thinking of. Nagios. They already have frameworks to register collectors with Nagios or OpenNMS. So what are we trying to provide? If the framework, the analytics platform I choose, already has a framework to import data, what is our framework adding?
Well, we're not building this for Nagios is the problem. Because we don't know who's sitting northbound. This is trying to be as minimal as possible to accommodate a variety of components that collect and make data available, and a variety of consumers of that data. Nagios perhaps be one.
I guess my point is, if I as a deployment person chose to use Nagios, Nagios has a framework to do that. If I choose OpenNMS, OpenNMS has a framework to do that. Why are we creating a middleman? They already have it's like we're trying to create a middleman when we don't need to. Because we can just say, oh, if you want to use Nagios for analytics, great, go use Nagios. Here's, maybe we'll write adapters to that. If you want to write OpenNMS, we'll write adapters to that. I'm not sure we need a common adapter that we then adapt to Nagios or OpenNMS or whatever. Does that make sense?
Well, I think what I'm trying to describe, though, is, on day one, a fairly minimal thing, and you could say, I don't need it, but this is the pivot point on which we can start reconciling all the different varieties towards a common set. I don't know if this is the right answer, but VES is a format that keeps coming up. It's a pivot point on which you can do that.
I'm curious though, David, you mentioned Nagios is being used for analytics. Is there some processing that is being done on the Nagios infrastructure itself?
Nagios has a bunch of plugins that they can pull in to do different analytics, and so it's also got an extensible framework that you can write that type of thing. I'm just using it as an example of an application that takes input from various sources. Right. So
Nagios infrastructure itself is purely for logging. So if you need plugins for that to do some sort of post-processing on that, that's an independent thing. And
but Larry already stated that we're not doing the analytics, so we're not doing the post-processing. We're making data available to analytics applications, and that's fine. I'm just suggesting that most of these analytics applications already have a way to import data. So I'm seeing a redundancy here where I don't. It's unclear that we need to do this work, I guess.
One of the purposes of Nagios is not to do any sort of real-time. It does have an eventing architecture, but it's less to do with real-time data processing and some sort of action associated with an event. It has more to do with some sort of asynchronous action that can take place either to correct a specific problem or for post-mortem.
Again, I don't want to get stuck in Nagios. I was using an example. I'm just saying there are systems out there that do this. Why are we implementing yet another system that does this? Whether it's Nagios, OpenNMS, ONAP through its DAC, DCAE. There are other systems that do this. Why are we deciding we need to add this onto us?
So one of the differences, David, that I think this approach takes from those systems is that in a container-based system, it's very hard to inject a collector or whatever piece of code takes data out of these systems and gets them to other systems. And also, we have a lot of transient things that are coming and going, that are containers or VMs or whatnot. So doing that sort of integration with another third-party service might be difficult. Now, it may be that somebody comes along and says, I want to use this other system and I'm going to redo the integration so that it matches my logging and monitoring system. And that's totally fine. But I guess it's hard to say. I think the goal here is to make a system that is, okay, you can go and do it yourself, or you can take our system that has already figured out where all the endpoints are, gives you an API for saying you can query what's the available data in this Cord system, and then figure out a way to get that data out of Cord and into whatever other monitoring system you want. So it isn't like a native implementation of Nagios or what have you, but it's a way to get to the same spot, but provide some level of indirection.
So I agree. We need a way to get our data out, right? So our container should be, but I'm saying the thing that pulls all that information that's exported together, we shouldn't be writing public agree. We should say, hey, let's go find one. There's got to be one. We shouldn't be doing collect our data.
So David, we're not collecting.
Available.
I mean, someone certainly could go off and build a collector. We're doing almost exactly the opposite. Which maybe we're tripping over the word collector. It's a collector only in the sense that it happens to have a bunch of data that someone else might find useful. How it got that data is an implementation choice, and we're calling that thing. And this language is kind of being borrowed from ONAP. That there are a set of collectors that sit below the analytics, below ONAP, sits below whatever is up there. Again, we don't know, and we don't want Nagios to specify. And we're defining a very thin way of registering those quote-unquote collectors so that other people can pull from them. Now, calling that a collector may be the thing that we're tripping over here. It is a collection of performance data, wherever it came from. I just don't want to limit it to individual probes that have been embedded in a VNF or something. Because as it turns out, we already have a bunch of machinery that, quote unquote, collects some stats and can report them northbound.
I guess I'm getting stuck on the fact that each of our containers publishes these events or this data on Kafka, or pick another message bus, I don't care which one, right? If we're publishing that data, why do we need to do anything else? Someone else can listen to that bus or listen to the other end of that conversation and deal with data normalization, because it's going to have to normalize into a specific format for analytics. I don't see why we have to do anything other than say, hey, we'll publish data. And maybe that's all you're saying, and maybe I'm just misunderstanding, but it sounds like you're doing more than just publishing data.
Well, so first of all, it won't be just that Kafka bus. It will be a variety of different sources. Secondly, we do need some level of security/access control. These are not all going to be publicly. We have about who's accessing what data. We could go down that rabbit hole quite a ways, but to work. The assumption that we're all in a shared trust domain on this wonderful message bus, I think, is just not going to hold.
Again, depending on which message bus you do, they have security, encryption, and can deal with some of that stuff. And we can talk about, do we need to encrypt at the source or whatever. I don't know. It feels like we're biting work off. And again, maybe complete my understanding. It feels like we're trying to scope work out that really has already been scoped out by other projects, and all we need is a source. And again, maybe I'm simplifying it, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I'm missing some key value that I go, oh, of course we need to do this. I don't see that. Maybe it's just me, but I'd rather take effort and make sure our data is available, and without necessarily doing more than publishing it, and then get the system to a point where it's do other things that are actually Cord.
So, David, I think on day one, it's awfully close to what you're describing. This is simply a record of what endpoints are available to those things that sit northbound, and we're calling those things that have endpoints collectors, and that then becomes an opportunity to inject some kind of access control.
I guess I don't see it's role with more than one message bus. It's not Cord's job to say we can go integrate and make this available via Kafka, via gRPC, via RabbitMQ.
But the problem is we already have data sources that aren't putting data onto message buses.
Yeah.
So that will be a very convenient place to put your data, but it's not the only one. We have, for example, we will have an endpoint to Elk Stack, and you can go get syslog data from there. Just to throw out a second example. So now we've got
a centralized analytics system. I'm going to bypass our Elk Stack and just use configure syslog to go right to my stuff, my existing stuff, right?
Well, except we've got
data in,
and we are correlating information across those logs to various objects that we're modeling, like subscribers, services. So there's an opportunity to we add value by the fact that we funnel that through to Elk Stack in a way that.
Well, presumably there's some level of one or more correlation. They could do that same correlation, and based on those correlation IDs, I don't know. I'm struggling. I feel like I'm derailing the meeting, and I apologize for that, but I'm struggling with this.
Well, clearly we have an issue we need to sort out, but
Elk Stack that
this is called our Cord that we're going to use as a driver to try to provide the performance and fault support that we need to.
And I've been very clear in the Volta TST meetings that Volta is a data source. It's not meant to do, and so that needs to happen in a third-party system.
I agree, and that's I completely agree with that.
So the thinnest possible ACORD layer is there's an ACORD service in XOS. When XOS brings up Volta, it makes a list of all of the data sources that Volta provides, and then has some API that someone else can hit to find out URLs or IP addresses or other endpoints to talk to Volta. And that's doing very, very little work as a sort of registration of endpoints, whether we call them collectors or providers or what have you. I don't think
I'm still at the point where I say, look, we own all the components in XOS and Cord. We can control, for the most part, how they publish their data. We could document the events they publish, the format they publish these on, right? Syslog's a known format. Other things we could standardize in documentation of how they publish them. And then we're done, right? It doesn't need code except to make sure our data is available. terms of in our how we describe our data on a bus.
Okay, I think those are all necessary things to do. I completely agree with that. I just don't think it's sufficient, and that I think maybe is the gap we're having here. And it might be sufficient for an immediate release. That's possible. You know, stage 0, stage 1. All right, so let's. I don't know, David, when you joined there. We started with a more narrow issue of getting ONU comes up notifications out of Volt. That one we can proceed on. We've got the broader issue of performance data being published, collected, made available, which we clearly need to converge on. And again, my point in the way to approach this was to do something very minimal out of the box, but do it in a way that provided I call it a pivot point on which we can add the other pieces that we need, but just not hold everything up waiting to the whole 9 yards. Are there other topics, or we can continue on this one, but I'm not sure we're making any sizable progress right now.
Well, have we agreed that we need a message bus? And then have we agreed that if we do need one, what it should be, a specific implementation?
Well, Scott, I'm going back to the early narrow question. The early narrow question was notification from ONOS about ONUs coming online. And I thought that we were going to use the message, A, we're going to use the message bus, B, we're going to use Kafka, and eventually B 7.1, worry about reconciling that with the Redis bus that we already have. And then C, the synchronizers would have any intelligence they needed to know what to watch for on that bus and what to pull up and react to.
So the synchronizers would be attached to the message bus and possibly also the core.
And possibly also the core. Scott, did that answer your questions?
Yeah, my only other question would be, what is the time frame for doing all this? Is it delivered by 6.0?
Yeah, it's delivered before 6.0 because this is part of the our cord that we're going to trial with.
I mean, it does sound a little bit ambitious, but it also sounds like something that we could get done in a sprint if we have to. Does everyone else agree?
So Jonah, what do you know about time frame?
Yeah, I think definitely before 6.0 we would need to have this if this is the mechanism we're going to choose. I was hoping to have a.
What is the current status of the pod? Because if we cannot get the ping working top down, I think that the priority of this is after the top down provisioning of the pod.
Yeah, I thought we agreed anyway on that, right? So we had this discussion because he was working on it, but we talked to John also the other day, and well, I think that this was my thought also. Saurav agrees that there's a logic. First, we need to push down a configuration, and then we fill in the configuration with some data automatically.
Yeah, no, I know that we all agree, but we said that this needs to happen for 6.0. But if we have to, and theoretically it can happen if we start working on that, I think, shortly. But if we need to spend a couple more weeks to get the top-down provisioning working, then maybe it's a stretch goal to have this in 6.0.
Agreed.
Yeah,
well,
I also
plus we will have the OpenStack and the Anchor stuff that comes in, right? So
yeah, I also think that I don't necessarily call it 6.0, but the June 15th deadline is an ambitious deadline for this. If it can be beyond that, that would be great. Whether we are calling the June 15 thing 6.0, 6.1, 5.9, really should not matter. But the June 15
The
deadline.
release. The real is not.
We have 2 sprints, but one of them's the hardening sprint. Just
Yeah, and that's the last
Okay.
sprint.
That's true.
I mean, we always end up using those hardening sprints for work anyway. They're kind of a lie sometimes, so we'll end up pushing it into that, I would assume.
True.
So
Because everything is thoroughly tested before it, checked and in. So of course, we don't need hardening.
Usually.
yeah, our continuous integration is just superb.
Exactly.
All
right. So by the way,
integration is called the loop.
By the way, just to remind everyone, the FCAPS work, while it would be good to do some design work and the kind of discussion we just had now, is technically not included in the release. We do, however, need Volta integration, of which what the narrow question that we started with is an issue. Even though we won't necessarily have any back room or back office integration at that point, we do probably need to have that done. I guess maybe there's a little gray area there because of how we would test that. Anything else?
Do we clarify the requirements from Cord in terms of synchronizer support?
I'm sorry, clarify requirements with respect to what?
So I'm hearing rumors that are requests from Cord to add synchronizers. Maybe we clarify that and see where it fits in the release.
So we have a best effort requirement on any new synchronizers that need to be written for 6.0. If it's a matter of putting something, the minimum line we're trying to hit is parity with 5.0 with respect to import. If there are new synchronizers that need to be written for new services, and I know there are, from a platform point of view, that's best effort. We're going to need MCord to carry most of that load. I don't think we have platform people to put on it in the same way that we did with 4.1 and 5.0.
The translation is you're writing the synchronizer something.
But for the synchronizers that already exist, it looks like we need to modify it much for the synchronizers already there. For the new synchronizers, for release, we have some new synchronizers we haven't written yet.
Okay, I mean what?
We haven't started that job yet. There's 1 or 2 more synchronizers to write for the
So that's fine, but they're saying we don't have, workforce inside the platform team. Basically, to work necessarily on guarantee that we will do work on the synchronizers, right? So the platform team can help, best effort, but you got to do the work.
yes, but a few days ago I discussed with Andy and Scott. They said for moving those the synchronizers, how much change for the existing.
No, this is about the new synchronizer. Who's going to do work on the new?
I see. If the new synchronizer, yes, we haven't. I'm calling myself, so.
But just be aware that the release should happen at 6.0, right? Which is mid-June.
Yeah, I know. We talked about this before.
So between.
I mean, of the new synchronizers, the priority is to not be dependent on the emulator and to get a physical eNode B. There are other services that are lower priority, but that would be the highest priority of the new services.
Is that what you're thinking? The eNode B needs a new synchronizer?
No, For the new the existing synchronizers can already make the end-to-end pass work. The new synchronizer is for, if I remember correctly, is for the X-run for those things.
Okay.
For some of the new features. Yes. For the end-to-end pass, we already have synchronizers in front of it.
Is that what
Well,
you're?
so we didn't. Ping, we didn't get that release, so we do need to make sure that we have a physical eNode B option in 6.0 if we possibly can. And I don't know technically if you consider that a new synchronizer or not, but.
The painting clarified that the end-to-end pass already works with the existing synchronizers, and so the new support is for X-RAN integration, which I think we said was lower priority.
Yeah, this is a low priority from MPOD.
Also, one question: has X-RAN been open sourced?
Let me check the log. I forgot the log here. Just a few days ago, I have a chat with discussion with OS. Except moving the current material, except moving the current synchronizers, we maybe want to undo the one more. If I remember correctly, it's for the X-run. Because X-run doesn't have XOS service or synchronizers inside X-run. Right now, it's a pure Onus application. Maybe we want to, similar like a program, we want to add a synchronizer for that application.
Yes, but I recall that X-run was not open source.
X-run, program is not open source. We are talking.
Yeah.
The Onus application is written by the X-run application is written by Dimitri's ours.
Yeah,
so
I know that.
That part is.
So few months ago, the X-run APIs were not open sourced yet.
The X-run, we are talking right now, we are talking about the Onus applications.
Okay, but we need something for the Onus application to talk to, otherwise there is not much point in having an Onus application.
Yeah, you need to totally run the X-run, and not just need the application synchronizer, you need the hardware indeed. So right now we are talking about right now what we can do is first move the software part, the Onus application part first, and the synchronizer to similarly with the X-run, you just not manually bring up the Onus application there. For the all the entire X-run work, I don't have a full picture right now. But for these pieces, I know this is planned for the 6.0. But this is the second priority. The first priority is still make the end-to-end pass works.
And then it sounds like for the end-to-end path, there's some modifications that are required, and so you need support from Andy and Scott for that.
Yeah. We already discussed that what the work with Zach and Andy. We discussed what's the step 1, what's the step 2.
Okay, so we're saying in 6.0 we'll need those changes, but the X-RAN stuff would be secondary priority.
Yes.
So
to distill down, for the bare minimum pass-through, we have all the synchronizers that we need. It just needs to be ported to 6.0. If we have some time, we will create a new synchronizer for the X-RAN component. And then, but if we don't do it for 6.0, it doesn't mean that MCOD will not work. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Larry, is that your understanding too?
Sorry, could you repeat it again?
So for the way the MCOD pieces are put together today, in order to get MCOD to work the way it is in 5.0, in 6.0 we don't need to create a new any new set of synchronizers. Existing synchronizers need to be ported to 6.0 and tested, and we will have the official MCOD. If we have time, we will need to create a new synchronizer for X-RAN, but it is not the top priority for 6.0.
That statement I agree with, but I believe there is a middle point, which is, and again, technically there may be a synchronizer, but we did not release a physical eNode B capability in 5.0. That would be higher priority than XRAN.
Larry, I don't understand what do you mean by eNode B and eNode B and the two pieces.
How do we?
So all of this is demoed at MWC, right? So I think what I'm hearing is all of this is already implemented for MWC. There just needs to be some updates.
So exactly, my point is, I'm talking very narrowly about something that was not in 5.0 technically released. I don't know how much work is required to get it releasable. It may be very, very small, and that would be great. I'm just saying that there is code that was not technically part of the 5.0 release that has been running, and we just need to make it part of 6.0.
So it sounds like there's some discussion. So from Andy and Scott's standpoint, what is the scope?
So my recollection of what Ping Ping and I have talked about is that I was explaining to her the new way of deploying XOS core and XOS services using Helm charts, and there was some work to do to take the existing mCord profile and mCord services and package them up in Helm charts so that they could be deployed using the new method. So that, I think, is orthogonal to the question of what updates need to happen to the services themselves in order to pull in changes that maybe were done for MWC.
Yeah, and my point is simply that MWC does not equal release. It hopefully is very, very close, but it's always been the case that there's been a little extra to do.
Yeah, I think the main point there is that, as Larry said before, as now the only way to use a real eNode B in mCord is using the program service that is not open source. So we should find an open source alternative before introducing XRAN. Is that correct, Larry?
Matthew, Larry, the XRAN, it's like this. The eNode B and XRAN right now are two different things. The eNode B already works. It's just a hardware box. The XRAN need a different hardware platform. So right now, in 6.0, we can't fully test the whole things for XRAN. We only port the ONOS application and maybe and the new synchronizers. They are different things. We can't put them together, the eNode B and XRAN.
So I think there's three things, right? There's the getting mCord ported over to Helm charts.
Yeah.
That's the first priority.
Yes.
There's the second one of getting the MWC demo stuff into 6.0.
No. The MWC demo stuff including a lot of things. Right now, the 6.0 release, for example, the demo including telemetry, like including the program. This is all private, so we will not release. We only release the basic service graph. Make people the end-to-end path. People can use the phone to attach it and make some.
So all of that is already on 6.0 on master.
No, we just start.
Okay, so you're pulling it over, but there are updates to synchronizers needed once you pull it over to master.
Yeah, the new synchronizer will not affect the basic end-to-end path.
But it's
just some new features.
That's the secondary piece of work, and then there's the work around XRAN. So I think we agreed XRAN is opportunity.
Sorry, I need to run, and there is a 6.0 migration document. Maybe Andy could post it if he's got it, or Ping Ping.
So
yeah,
plus this is, right, there are two things we need to focus on. One is mCord. And then one is getting the mCord functionality working, right, on parity with MWC. So let's assess the scope of those two work efforts.
And there is a mCord up migration to 6.0 document that Zach has just posted a link to that has collected all that stuff.
I sent it to you directly, and Yeah, let's look at that and work on that. Should I post it on one of the public channels?
That's fine.
Yeah, okay.
All right, let's tie up those loose ends in that document and make sure we understand what we're doing.
Yeah, I can write down maybe just I can update that document and also get a confirmation from us and all the people on same page. Because for the 6.0 release, only I and us talked about a few days ago, and not really totally set down. Some of the work we are unknown how much of the work. For example, the XRAN, the Dimitrix use maybe a relatively old version of ONOS. Can we accept that version, or should we also move to a new version of ONOS even? So we are having a totally set down, but I can write down the maybe 3 or 4 items inside the document.
Okay, and then you can clarify the support that you need from the platform team.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Cheers, guys.
Bye, guys.
Well,